Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the Cryptodamus Astrology channel, where we talk about general astrology, aspects, alignments, and events. We also sometimes take a look at the financial markets and see what kind of correlations are going on there between astrology and finance. So I wanted to do a video for you guys today because we have a big, nasty T-square aspect that's coming up this week. It's one of the most important alignments of 2023. And unfortunately, it's one of the more difficult alignments of 2023. So I wanted to give you guys a heads up on that. First of all, Mercury went direct last night. So that's kind of a bonus. That's a hallelujah. Finally, this difficult Mercury retrograde period is over. We've gotten through two eclipses. We've gotten through a Mercury retrograde period, but we're not out of the woods yet because we have a nasty T-square alignment that I'm going to talk about and tease apart a little bit so we can understand all the different components that are going on. This is a really big week in astrology, folks. We've got two planets that are changing signs. That in and of itself can sometimes bring kind of drama, turmoil, crisis. It's an energy shift. When major planets change signs, it's a change in the energy pattern. And changes when you get two planets changing signs, you can often get some type of a crisis, like we saw when Saturn went into Pisces. We saw the banking crisis erupt out of nowhere. So Jupiter's going to go into Taurus tomorrow, and it's going to stay there for the next 12 months. Okay. So that's a pretty big change. We've had Jupiter in Aries for most of 2023. Jupiter was in Aries for some of 2022. It did crisscross back and forth a bit between Pisces and Aries, but it's been solidly in Aries for the last 4 months. And that's actually been quite bullish for the markets. We've seen obviously big rallies in crypto, and we did see a rally in stocks as well. So the change to Taurus is going to be interesting. Jupiter is a wealth planet. Taurus is a wealth sign. So it could be favorable. However, it loses some of that hot, fiery kind of passionate energy of Jupiter in Aries that was really good for the markets this year so far. So Jupiter is going to cross into Aries tomorrow. That's Tuesday, May 16th, and it's going to make the ingress right at 10:20 a.m. U.S. West Coast Pacific time. And it will be setting up this really difficult T-square. So the first thing it's going to do is actually it's going to square Pluto on Wednesday, the 17th. So let me just go, hang on a second here. Just bear with me. I always forget to set this up beforehand, but I'm going to go to my astrology software program, which is Luna Astrology. And you guys can check that out. If you use the Cryptodamus code, use my name, Cryptodamus, you'll get a discount for signing up with Luna Astrology software. So here is updated right now to the minute. These are the planetary positions right now. You can see Jupiter's at 2950 degrees Aries. We go to tomorrow, it's going to cross into 0 degrees Taurus. And then it's going to set up a square to Pluto. And this is kind of one of the bigger aspects of 2023, actually. Even though it's relatively short-lived, it's only basically for a couple of days, but it does signal and symbolizes kind of authoritarian power struggles. We might be seeing that playing out in the debt ceiling standoff, which I'm going to talk about, especially in fixed signs where the positions can become quite fixed. It's also associated with wealth inequality, where some sectors can do extremely well while other sectors could get really badly damaged by this aspect. So it's very extreme. It's also considered to be very extreme in opinions, judgments, philosophies, ideas, and belief systems. Again, especially in the fixed signs of Aquarius and Taurus. So this does set up a very stubborn standoff. Okay, that could be quite dangerous. Where things get even more complicated, well, on the 17th, it makes the exact square to Pluto. However, it's really on the 19th when Mars is going to go into Leo. And on the 20th, it's going to form first the opposition to Pluto. So on the 20th, Mars is going to oppose Pluto. And this happens basically every 2 to 2.5 years. It's not that big a deal in and of itself. It is a very violent, aggressive aspect that indicates the kind of brutal use of force and aggression to get its way. And it is associated with violent conflict or gun violence. It can also be associated with like kind of freak powerful storms that have a very aggressive energy, or events like earthquakes or something like this, tornadoes, that events that can do a lot of damage. It is kind of a war, a battle aspect. But what makes this one unique is that they're all lining up at 0 degrees fixed, and Jupiter is going to square both Mars and Pluto, and that has the effect really of exaggerating the crisis, or creating a big drama and exaggerating the crisis and blowing things up way out of proportion. And that's why this aspect is kind of dangerous here. So it is associated with war, violence, and conflict, and it is a dangerous aspect. And certain kind of mentally unstable individuals, this is the kind of aspect that can trigger like a violent, this can destabilize them and trigger some type of violent outburst. So I am kind of worried about some type of gun violence in the United States or elsewhere, some type of regional political conflict flaring up. There's been a lot of heat developing between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza recently. The Israelis have been bombing the Islamic Jihad group, and they've been firing rockets to Israel. So that's something that can blow up. A lot of people have been waiting for the Ukraine spring offensive to try to take back territory from the Russians. This is certainly an aspect that could initiate a major intensification of the war in Ukraine, especially since President Zelensky has his Mars at 0 degrees Leo. So this alignment is going to fall right on his Mars at 0 degrees Leo. So this is definitely something to watch there in Ukraine. Also, as we know, the debt ceiling standoff in the United States between the House of Representatives, led by Speaker McCarthy, and the Republicans are in a standoff with President Biden. They need to vote to raise the debt ceiling limit. Otherwise, the U.S. runs out of money and defaults on its treasuries and loans and can't pay its staff or government admin people. They're trying to blackmail President Biden into cutting his agenda. And they tried to do this before in 2011, which interestingly enough was the last time that Jupiter was in Taurus. So they're working to try to make an agreement, but it's getting up to the wire. The U.S. is supposed to run out of money by June 1st, but the agreement actually has to be signed before then so it can move through Congress and get the votes passed. So we're coming, things are getting pretty tense. And this indicates that the standoff does come to a head, potentially comes to a crisis. And again, this is kind of May 19th, May 20th, May 21st. It even can go a little bit longer into May 22nd. That's when Mars and Jupiter hit it exact. We do get a little bit of mitigation from the sun, actually. So the sun is going to enter 0 Gemini, and that's going to trine Pluto, and it's going to sextile Mars. So that offers a little bit of benefit that might diffuse the crisis and offer a way out. When you get that third planet that trines, sextiles, in opposition, it's kind of like the diplomat who is able to neutrally help the two opposed parties to find a solution. In this case, it's the sun. So that might be favorable. Going back a day or two, we also have a new moon in Taurus. It's actually at 28 degrees Taurus, and that's on Friday, the 19th. And that's going to be, as I said, at 28 degrees Taurus. My software program isn't working that well here right now. Let's see if I can get that. There we go. So the new moon itself is somewhat favorably placed because the moon is exalted in Taurus and it's in a sextile to Mars at 29 Cancer, the sun and the moon, and they're in a sextile to Neptune at 27, and Mars and Neptune are in a trine. So the new moon itself is somewhat favorable, I would say. And also maybe could offer some type of mitigation to this tense standoff. So then, once we get past, if we can get past the 22nd, I think, whoops, let me go back. Let me set this for the day. So if we can get past the 22nd, that's when Mars, so Jupiter is going to square Pluto on the 17th. Mars is going to oppose Pluto on the 20th, and then Mars is going to square Jupiter on the 22nd. So this alignment takes shape between May 17th, May 9th, May 20th, and May 22nd. After that, now that T-square can activate, and it can take a few days to play out, but once we get past the 22nd, potentially things could ease, especially when Mars moves to the 2nd degree of Leo and that the T-square starts to break up. So I think that then Jupiter in Taurus is going to hit the North Node on June 1st. Okay, now Jupiter conjuncts the North Node about once every, I think it's once, roughly once every 14 years or so. And usually the North Node tends to strengthen or add energy to any planet that it touches. So in this case, it would strengthen Jupiter. It would add energy to Jupiter. Jupiter is generally considered to be a favorable, lucky planet. So Jupiter on the node would be theoretically to be a favorable event in my reading of it. Now, the last time Jupiter conjuncted the North Node in Taurus was actually I believe, in the middle of 1929. I'm hesitant to say that because there's so many astrologers are always predicting a 1929 every month practically. Now, at that time, that was actually kind of almost the top of the Roaring 20s market. It did continue up for a few months after that, but it did signal a peak. And then the market crashed actually about 3 or 4 months later. So it certainly wasn't triggered by Jupiter North Node. In this case, things actually start to become more favorable as we go into June. So I do think there is a resolution to this debt ceiling problem. Cooler heads will ultimately prevail as Jupiter starts to sextile Saturn in June, and especially that's going to hit exact right in the middle of June, and that's a very favorable aspect. So Jupiter in Taurus, after it gets through that nasty looking T-square, with the Jupiter apex, then Jupiter node and then Jupiter sextile Saturn in June seems to be quite favorable for prosperity and good for financial markets and the economy. The question is, how much damage is done this week during the T-square? How close do we get to default? How close do we get to a credit rating downgrade? Could this end up tumbling the financial markets? If we go to my May subscription newsletter that was sent out on May 1st, this information was sent out to all my subscribers. We go back and look at the last time that Jupiter was in Taurus in 2011 to 2012. And by the way, this is on my Patreon group. Especially at the $25 level gets the more in-depth, long-term, big picture research. So this was actually, there was the debt ceiling crisis of 2011. So this is, astrological history is repeating again. This is really interesting. And although the US did not default, there was a credit rating downgrade, and the S&P 500 dropped 17% in 4 weeks. Okay, can you imagine if that happens today? That would be really interesting, really unusual. It then recovered 25% over the course of about 6 months. Okay, but that, Jupiter went into Taurus, you got basically a kind of a choppy sideways move. And then about 5 or 6 weeks in, it dropped 17%. And then at the end, it kind of went down for about 4 or 5 weeks, and it ended up roughly where it had begun. So there was overall no net change in that period of Jupiter in Taurus, even though there was an enormous amount of volatility. The previous period of Jupiter in Taurus was actually 2000, the year 2000. We also saw this time when Jupiter went into Taurus, we actually saw a pretty good rally here of about 10 to 15%, followed by a huge 10% drop in the weekly candle of the S&P 500. So a lot of volatility. Jupiter in Taurus has brought a lot of volatility to markets. In this case, you actually had an overall 10% gain in the market in the year 2000. And if we go back one more cycle, again, all this information was sent to my subscribers on Patreon. If you want to get this kind of information, please join my Patreon group. I'll put the information in the video description. The third previous time was 1989. Jupiter was in Taurus March through July, and you got one of the most bullish periods of the three. You got an 18% gain for the S&P 500 over the course of that period of March through July. So in that case, Jupiter in Taurus was quite bullish, and you had a major rally occur. So the last two times Jupiter's been has been quite volatile. And it's going to be interesting to see, what happens this time around. I mean, Taurus is a sign that is a wealth sign. It's associated with banking, the banking sector, money, and it's often considered to represent money and currencies, actually. Now, Jupiter and Taurus also make some very favorable aspects in the Bitcoin natal chart. So this is adding yet another dimension to the picture. If those transits play out, especially between May 16th and May 22nd, Jupiter's going to make sextile to Bitcoin Venus and a trine to Bitcoin Pluto, which could be very, very favorable. If those transits play out, then it looks very favorable. However, so it's really a split picture here, because the general astrology of this T-square is pretty alarming, right? And that has the potential to do a lot of damage to markets. Again, if there's not a debt ceiling agreement, I think markets could take a big tumble. A lot of traders, there's a big increase in traders who are betting that the VIX is going to go up. That's the Wall Street fear gauge. So the T-square looks very, very difficult between, as I said, May 17th and May 22nd, whereas the transits in the Bitcoin chart actually look quite favorable. So, but the transits alone are not always enough. It's not a guarantee, as we saw in 2021 when Jupiter entered Pisces, and it made a conjunction to Bitcoin Venus and a sextile to Bitcoin's natal Pluto. We thought that looked quite bullish at the time. It didn't turn out that way. And Jupiter has dignity in the sign of Pisces. We thought that ingress was going to be quite favorable. It turned out to be quite the opposite. We got a market crash in May of 2021. So again, we have some really favorable bullish looking transits from Jupiter to the Bitcoin chart. Uranus right now is in a very favorable position for Bitcoin as well. And that really hasn't produced the kind of excitement that I thought we were going to see in the market. So this is really a very difficult to predict situation, as I told my subscribers in the update today. There's very complex factors which make it quite difficult to make a specific prediction for how this is going to play out. But I do think, as I said, that this aspect definitely we could see a major political conflict or international conflict flare up, especially in the hot spots of the Ukraine, the Middle East, and other places elsewhere. There's always people are asking me about China, Taiwan. I don't see anything. I haven't read any news or seen anything specifically about that. So hopefully that's not going to come out of the blue and blindside us. But this debt ceiling standoff does have this black swan potential, because the Republicans in the House are pretty extreme. And there's a lot of debate about whether they can even agree on raising the debt ceiling. Whether they're willing to, whether even if Speaker McCarthy is able to negotiate an agreement, can he get the votes from from his caucus, and that's really uncertain. They've taken a very hard line on the debt ceiling, and they're kind of risking a global economic crisis here. So I think it's, we're all going to be sitting on the edge of our seat over the next actually 2 weeks before what Secretary Yellen has said is the X day, roughly June 1st, when the US government runs out of money. Now, as I've said, the Jupiter Saturn sextile in June looks very favorable. Odds are this is going to work out and agreement will be reached eventually. Again, the big question is how much damage is going to happen to the markets and the economy before they make the agreement. And that's what happened in 2011. So it would, we very well could see a repeat of what happened in 2011. So that's what I got for you guys today. I'll definitely do another update as we're moving into the next couple of weeks. And Jupiter is in Taurus, and we have a better idea of what that means. Overall, that should be favorable for the banking sector. Jupiter usually is favorable for the sectors associated with that sign. Uranus in Taurus was quite favorable for a technological revolution in finance for cryptocurrencies. Jupiter in Taurus also could be very favorable for crypto. And that's going to be, for the next year into 2024. So it's really quite a long period of time. So I hope you find that this information useful and interesting, and feel free to ask any questions in the comments. Please check out my website, www.astrocryptoreport.com, and check out my Patreon group, Cryptodamus1 on Patreon. And we'll see you guys later. Have an excellent week. And, unfortunately, let's get ready for some major drama to occur over the next 7 to 10 days. Peace.